Welcome to CJ's Chatbox. We have a very special meeting today, a greeting and meeting today with the vets. I have a very heart for the vets that has become more and more pronounced over the years. At the time of Vietnam, I was so immature and distracted that I didn't really get to understand it all. So in meeting some of these vets here in the village, and them kind of talking about some of the things that they experienced, it's horrific, but even more horrific was their lack of welcoming them back to the States. It was like America was ashamed that we'd even gotten involved over there, and so nobody wanted to talk about it, to think about it, to raise any kind of awareness of it. So there wasn't a ticker tape parade for you when y'all came home. It was the reverse. You maybe got a few tomatoes, a few eggs thrown at you. Maybe people spit on you because they thought you were baby killers, that you were drug addicts, and that's the kind of welcoming you got from the U.S. And please accept my apology. But I want to have everyone introduce themselves and tell where they were and what branch of the service they were in. And if they want to give the year that they were there, that would be great. And we'll start with you, Bob.
I'm Bob Fraswell. I am a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer. I served in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then I also served again in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I spent 23 years in the military, and I retired back in 2007.
And you, dear?
Ken Simonson. I was with combat engineers up in the Ashaw Valley in the I Corps, which wasn't a pleasant place. But I just spent 3 years in the Army. And that was, for me at the time, was enough.
I would guess so, yeah.
My name is David Finley, and I'm a retired Naval Reserve captain. President Kennedy recalled the reserves in 1961, and I was on a ship that was sent to Vietnam.
Uwe?
I'm Uwe Simonetto. I'm a retired journalist from Germany. I was a combat correspondent in the Vietnam War for over a period of 5 years, from 1965 to 1969, and then again in 1972. I covered all the horrible events that happened in Vietnam, notably the Tet Offensive 1968. Now, I'd like to add something else. Prompted by this experience and other events, I later studied theology, and as part of my theological studies, I worked as a chaplain intern with Vietnam vets in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Okay. And so I know how badly, they told me how badly they were received when they were coming back. Mm-hmm. Having been with people like all of you in heavy combat in Vietnam as a war correspondent, I think I have a few things to say. About the betrayal of the South Vietnamese and American soldiers and Australian and Korean soldiers by civilians and politicians in this country and elsewhere in the world is number two.
Hey, my name is Rene Macaray. I'm a retired now. I was a private 4th class in the U.S. Army with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam in the Central Highlands. And as the war started, we saw the news articles and the TV programs and that thing, and I felt like, okay, it's my duty. We're fighting the communists because that's what we were told. This was about stopping communism, and we went at it full blower. That's what we were there for. However, I'd like to make a real distinction here, since most all of us are combat veterans, and Uwe, I'm going to say, is also a combat veteran. He was a journalist. He covered the war from a journalist perspective, but he was in the thick of things. And what that does is it creates a brotherhood. The brotherhood is people that have been in combat and understand what that is about. And it creates a huge bond, which we call a brotherhood. Women not excluded. There were nurses, there were people that put their life on the line as much as we did. But to understand where we are coming from in our thoughts and our concerns today, it's very important to understand what we have gone through and why we are today in organizations like the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, because again, that is a brotherhood. And we serve, we are in the VFW to serve our brother veterans. But the other very important thing that I think Uwe hit on, as well as Dave, a couple of the other people, is because we're going to be talking to civilians. This is going to be aired to civilians who have not been in combat. They don't understand the brotherhood that is, the bond that is formed. And more importantly, the history that was made, whether it was good or bad, right? And when I say good or bad, I will give some examples. This is Life magazine from 1972. And the front page says Vietnam retreat, okay? And we retreated. We were there as combat veterans to fight communism, and we literally, as Uwe mentioned, we left that country in the dirt. We took off, we didn't finish what we started doing there. And again, in Afghanistan, here's another article from the VFW magazine that says, most vets say U.S. did not leave Afghanistan honorably. Bob can probably later expand on that, and he probably will, with the aftermath of what we left there and how we left. But just to tie it in, I'd like to read a quote. Just a quick quote. This is from Adrian Cronauer, who was an Air Force disc jockey, portrayed by Robin Williams in the movie Good Morning Vietnam. His quote goes, "I am here to tell you that I went out into the field close to a dozen times and interviewed hundreds of Americans. And you know what? I never met a single murderer. I never met a single rapist. I never met a single baby killer. I never met a single psychotic. I never met a single dope addict. Who I did meet were a number of honorable men and women who might not have been so pleased with where they found themselves, but they were determined to do their duty as well and as honorably and effectively as they could." I think that's huge, because that is exactly why we were there. Yes, we were there to fight communism, but I'll tell you, the bottom line, once you get into combat and a war situation, and I know every one of you will probably attest to this, it's not so much about fighting communism as it is to help your brothers get through the fight. It's the guy on your right, that's the guy on your left. And that's where the brotherhood is born, because you're fighting for your survival as you're doing battle in whichever conflict you're in. That's what it comes down to. And so the reason we are in the Mission Viejo VFW is because we want to continue serving. It's our time now to give back. We were the lucky ones. We survived for the most part, physically anyway. We survived our combat. but mentally we're all dealing with different issues related to that. You know, that's just something that we deal with on our own. That's why we go to combat veterans groups that started as rap groups way back in the beginning, as Uwe will attest to as well. They called them rap groups because the combat veterans had no other place to go for being understood of what they went through. And so from the rap groups, the organizations like the VFW, American Legion, other organizations that cater to veterans, was formed to feel like you were in a similar situation where you're understood. The people, the guy next to you, the guy to the right to you, understood what you went through and what you had to do to survive. And so now we are at a point where we're retired, you know, we're fairly comfortable, I could say, for myself at least, I'll speak for myself. You know, we try to conduct our life as best as we can. And again, for myself, I feel like it's now my time to give back to the veterans who didn't make it, as well as their families, and the veterans who did make it but need help. And that's why I am in the VFW and I joined the American Legion. Now, to summarize that quickly, what I think is important out of all of this is understanding the history of all of these conflicts, whether it be Vietnam, Afghanistan. How did we do? Why were we there? How did we resolve that, or did we resolve it? And it's pretty apparent that Vietnam was not resolved honorably. Afghanistan was not resolved honorably. And now we're facing the Ukrainian conflict, I'll call it, where the Russians, once again, as Dave mentioned, you know, the big nuclear superpower, is trying to start something again, you know, and we have to look at it. The first thing I thought about was, oh my God, are we going to go in as a country? And if we do go in, do we have this fight honorably? Well, this is not our fight, as Uwe said. It's not our fight. They're not a NATO country. They're not threatened. However, you know, when any harm is being pushed on a country that didn't ask for it, and certainly didn't create that conflict, you know, can we just stand by and do nothing? You know, that's my concern. And what can we do, you know, as individuals to support, you know, what is going on? And the way I see that we can support it is to do this kind of thing we're doing today, to make sure that people that are not combat veterans, that have not gone through a war, understand how important it is to know your history, know where things have come from and why they've evolved the way they have. It's so important. As history is being erased in this country, you know, step by step, we're toppling statues, you know, we're stopping the education of history. What is going on in this country? This is very, very dangerous.
Not just in this country, alas.
And it's exactly not just in this country, it's on a global scale. You know, people want to erase the history, and that is a very dangerous precedent, because the only way we know how to go forward and, you know, try to continue our liberty, our freedoms, you know, the individual freedoms which are so important that this country was established on. How do we continue doing this as veterans? And that's kind of my piece.
And there again, it's back to this need to say, why are we doing this? What's happened to our country? It is.
I think that's a very good point that you bring up as well, as, you know, that we just left this business unfinished. I know it's been kind of in a dark humor kind of way, but it took 4 presidents, trillions of dollars, and all of these years, all of these lives spent to take the Taliban and replace them with the Taliban. And it, you know, you have to look at that with a sense of more humor, but you have to also look at that at what a waste. And you know, it has been mentioned here that we went in with this very unclear mission, and instead of defining what that mission was, we left it unclear, and so there was no objective, there was no, okay, here's the goal line, that's what we're going to do. So the answer was, well, we'll throw a bunch of money at it and a bunch of lives at it, and maybe it will resolve itself. And the bad thing about that is we've seen the Russians, the Soviets before us, and countless other people try to do the exact same thing, and we didn't learn from those mistakes. Yeah. And so I think Rene brought up another good point too, is that we are not teaching the history. We are not learning from the mistakes of the past, so therefore are we doomed to repeat it? Quite likely. But now we are seeing, at least in the American society, a certain complacency, a certain amount of deniability that, oh, it can't happen here, so I don't have to worry about it. And I'm sure the Ukrainians felt the same way. It can't happen here, so we don't have to worry about it. Let's not prepare for it. And we are also, therefore, seeing a bit of deniability, as I said. We're not teaching this stuff because it's either too harsh, it's too stressful, it's bad, we don't want to hear about it. You know, there are, kids going through our public school system right now that aren't even learning the lessons of World War II, for gosh sakes, because it harms them, it hurts their feelings. And so, well, to what end?
Ukrainians, the elderly people that don't have weapons, but they're bringing their kitchen knife. Yeah. I don't know that we here in this country, how many patriots are willing to go fight on the line with a kitchen knife? That's what frightens me about America and the loss of our possible freedoms and our democracy, because it is fragile. And we've become so weak that it goes, and of course the family is the center of civilization, and we haven't had sound families for decades and decades and decades. So therefore we don't have that kind of strength.
Humanity. Let's not focus on splitting this country by all of these different sections, because that's what's happening today. That's the false flag to me.
Well, one of the problems is, of course, also, I noticed with horror, is the disdain, the both sides in this country. Now, don't forget, I've been a reporter in this country since the Cuban Missile Crisis, in between Vietnam and others, but I came here because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, civil rights movement, Kennedy assassination, all that. I always wondered, why do they hate each other so? I mean, and yeah, but I must say, I was very proud of my country on last Sunday when the Bundestag met in an extraordinary session. And except for the former communists of East Germany and the hard right AfD, Alliance for Germany, these diverse groups, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Greens, and Liberals, that's not American left-wing liberals, I mean liberals being free market liberals, supporting each other and saying, no, we made a mistake, we made a big boo-boo, we let our country slip, let's pump $100 billion into our defense, euros, it's $110 million, let's turn around and fast, and let's give the Ukrainians all the weapons they need. And the interesting thing, and now this is where I would like to, I'm saying this, I'm taking my time here because it has to be told to America, but even the Swiss, who are so ultra-neutral, are now joining the rest of Europe in at least all the civil actions against Russia. For example, Russia out of the SWIFT system. And this is going to be dire for the Russians. They don't produce a thing other than weapons. The Russians have nothing to offer. Nothing except raw materials and weapons and an army. and the ruble is going south, the shelves empty. But the Swiss, who had never been in a war since William Tell, the Swiss say, no, enough's enough.
Yeah. Well, again, that's I guess my bottom line we come to as close as we're getting to this and the fear that everybody has that we're going to jump into something else. But the bottom line again to me is how strong are we? We are so divided within our own country, black versus white, gender versus gender. I mean, it's just nonstop. And that we don't have time to focus on what's really important. And I don't know, again, if we have, and this has been going on for too many generations, can we survive? Are we strong enough morally? Our moral compass is so off base now, but do we have the guts? And that's why when you talked about the need for you guys to meet together because you have this brotherhood, that to me was like, okay, I understand that totally, because any support group you have, I don't care what it's on, but you have got to be someone that has had those boots on or those shoes on in order for you to all understand each other. So you don't need to spell it out, because when you say one thing, what I noticed the first time you guys met with Ube, when he was talking about different things that he had experienced, that I watched all your heads in agreement, that you all knew exactly what he was talking about. You had memory, you probably smelled the smell of death, that you remembered those things. And that's the part about the necessity of staying together to talk about these things. I applaud you to keep doing what you're doing, inviting as many, and I know that besides being there as brothers, you also help them out to do all the paperwork that's necessary when they have to go into the VA for anything.
To get their benefits and things like that.
Yeah.
That's a big point.
I feel they ought to take the VFW magazine. Everybody ought to read that.
Mm-hmm.
American Legion puts out a good
They
magazine.
do.
And schools go on field trips. They ought to go, if anything, just sit outside Long Beach Hospital and watch the veterans that go in there and that are there forever.
And I
Until
think,
their life ends.
please tell us about that, because you used to visit before the pandemic. You went to the Vets Hospital in Long Beach.
Our VFW, one of the things that we do is we before COVID, we would support the spinal injury ward, specifically of the VA Long Beach Hospital, because those are people that all they see is doctors and nurses, and some of them are there for their lifetime, literally for the rest of their life, and they may or may not have family to come visit them. So we go there 3-4 times a year, or used to before COVID, and we would do a barbecue. We would do hot dogs and hamburgers, salads and drinks. And we would chat them up. We'd bring in a band to play some music and kind of help get the stress of their daily routine off of them. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying too, as far as the PTSD, the experiences that are created, the angst and the concern and the PTSD thereby that we all deal with. And people need to understand that PTSD is manageable, but it does not go away. A lot of people think, oh yeah, just go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and you'll get your help, and then you'll be just great again, right? Well, no, it's not how that works. You learn how to manage that stress by joining the groups, the veterans groups, which is, we call it a longevity group, and it's basically what we form to help each other stay healthy. How do we stay mentally healthy? How do we stay physically healthy? But it also includes, not very often, but a lot of us have dealt with the Vietnam and the Afghanistan things, but they're still there. They're there. And so if we ever go off track, it's great to be in a group of common, our brothers and sisters in some cases that have dealt with that. And what have they done? So you're learning constantly. But you have to accept that responsibility.
You need more than your brothers. You need the support of the population. And I guess I must say one thing. When I lived most of my life in America. I lived in New York, and under the 59th Street Bridge, you had these Vietnam veterans at the time. They lived there. They couldn't find out where they lived there. So at least the neighbors, that's a pretty fancy neighborhood, you know, east side of Manhattan, 50s is fancy. People came out, brought them their food from their lunch tables. I said, well, I tell you what, I'm Lutheran. I'll bring you a big bottle of wine. I said, why would you give them wine? They're already drunk. I said, am I the judge? If that makes them happy, if they feel better with a glass of wine with the food you bring, let them drink wine. I'm not pumping heroin into them or anything, and I'll give them a bottle of huge jug of good red wine.
But again, when you're talking about the fact that how they deal with it, as you were saying, that it's ongoing because it's there, but you learn to control it. And what I see too many times on documentaries of how they handle PTSD is drawers full of prescription drugs. So it's like, well, that's not deal with the pain, let's just numb the pain. And then you stay in that numb state, so we never have to get to the bottom of this. That's how we've learned to handle problems now. We have a pain management on every corner of our streets. Nobody has you can't bite a bullet anymore. You just take a pill and then you'll be numbed out.
Well, there are a number of groups that are around right now, and I am aware of, I mean, there are the World War II, Korean War veterans groups. There are the Vietnam veterans groups. There are, I am actually a part of a group called the Other Guys.
Okay. All in one lump
we
sum. Yeah.
We were from the Kosovo, Desert Storm, Bosnia, era that we don't fit into anywhere else because we have that. And then there are OEF Afghanistan groups. Now, I did not go to Afghanistan. I was more of the Iraq and Desert Storm era. But it is well known amongst the veterans now that a lot of the younger guys coming back from Afghanistan now, even those that do happen to find their way into groups, they are really struggling with PTSD issues. They're struggling with alcohol. They're struggling with substance abuse issues because they are lacking the information of where to turn.
Okay.
And there's a lot of the youthful immortality type of presence. And I know when I went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I was 25 at the time. And quite honestly, I knew very little of what Kuwait was. I didn't know a whole lot about Iraq, other than, gee, don't they have the Tower of Babel there somewhere? And, that's about what I knew. And very, very, very uninformed about that. But now, there are elements amongst all of these groups that I spoke of, and not even just the groups, but just the veterans themselves, there are common experiences. There are elements that transition between the different eras of veterans. We are all combat veterans. And I know that when Rene and when Ken and they were over in Vietnam, I was 6. So I I don't know a whole lot about Vietnam. My father was there, and so I know a little bit about that. But then in my own era, as I experienced Desert Storm, and I experienced Iraq in 2003, and then again in 2005, I was with a Marine Corps unit, and I experienced that conflict. And there are feelings and experiences that even though I don't know what jungle warfare is all about, you know, I'm a desert guy. But it doesn't matter because, you know, there are things that, you know, Ken and I share just simply by virtue of being there, being in that, you know, 95% boredom, 5% sheer terror, you know, and I don't need to talk to Ken about my experiences, and he doesn't need to share his with me because we just know.
Yeah, yeah.
And we are we're accepting of each other.
Yeah. Well, it's the same for Vietnam veterans as far as knowing what we were getting into, as much as you had no idea, right?
Yeah,
I mean, at least for me, my dad, the only thing I knew about the Vietnam War was my dad turned on the TV and he showed me this movie. I think it was of the Big Red One, you know, of their experience in Vietnam, and I'm watching these guys in firefights and stuff. I'm going, okay, yeah, that looks pretty cool. You know, I used to love watch cowboys and Indians. You know, I'm from Holland, right? My family immigrated from the Netherlands in 1960, and we had very little television then. And man, as a kid, 11 years old, I came here and there were westerns, all these cowboys and Indians, all these TV programs, and I loved it, you know. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. And then here I am now as a young adult, well, 19, 20 years old, about to go into a war that I had no idea about the country. Well, I had a little bit of an idea because we did live near, you know, we lived on Java for a little while as a family. After my family was repatriated from the Japanese as POWs in Indonesia. But anyway, I'm watching this movie and I'm going, okay, it's kind of like cowboys and Indians, you know, they're shooting at each other and you know, stuff happens. But you really have no clue what that's about until you get personally involved in combat with your brothers, you know, to the left and to the right of you. The sheer terror of that, like you said, the 5 minutes of just adrenaline pumping, and everything goes into slow motion as you're in combat and you're trying to survive and you're trying to kill the guy that's trying to kill you. It's just a whole different experience.
But when you were too. And so, and we only saw, you know, old movies, black and white movies about the military life and everything. So therefore that was my experience. But then when Vietnam, the part that I couldn't understand, and I'm old enough so I should have understood, I could watch the war on TV. They had cameras there that were filming the war, the combat, right there. And I'm like, if we have the technology to do that, do we not have the smarts and the technology to stop this nonsense? That just didn't register with me. Like, how can we take this and sit at home eating popcorn, watching it?
But that's
let me say something. I had horrible nightmares of the Vietnam War and other wars. This was probably my only war. Minister in St. Cloud in this VA, who came home, all of them being called baby killers. All of them. I had three therapy groups together with a couple of shrinks. 3 therapy groups, all of them. And there was one guy who came home, went to his home, went to a church where he was, I fear it might have been a Lutheran church, that was pretty balmy one. The church he was confirmed, baptized and confirmed and went with his bed. And the pastor said from the pulpit, you have no right to be here. Come back when your hair is growing out and when you wear proper clothes and you know.
Again, that's that being turned away. One of the things that this gentleman that I spoke with that said that he thought he was over what's right here. He said that if someone said there's no way you can imagine having a baby, you can't imagine that unless you've actually done it. He said you can't imagine watching your buddies being killed. You can't even fathom that any more than you can, you know, as you said, watching things on TV is not, watching a film about things, it can still move you, but the idea of having been there, and I haven't been, thank God I haven't been there. But the fact that, to me, again, the more that I watch, the more that I hear documentaries, the American Veteran that's on PBS that I watched, that was horrific to have to hear. They said that I feel like I'm in two worlds. I'm a vet, but the civilians think I'm in another world, and so I can't even integrate anymore.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty with, like you said, the young guys and gals that are coming back from Afghanistan. They're dealing with reintegrating into civilian life, and that's very difficult. And civilians have no idea what that's about. They have no way to connect the emotions, the feelings, the fear, the anger, all the things that they're dealing with, and trying to reestablish themselves as regular civilians, because they're not. They're never going to be.
It's interesting because when anyone joins the military, whether they're a volunteer, whether they're inducted, whatever, whether they have obligated service from college or ROTC, whatever, and you have that civilian who now joins the military, it's not like you just put on a uniform and you go be military. I mean, there is basic training. There is officer candidate school, there's boot camp, there's whatever. You are taking that person and you are divesting them of their individuality, and you're conditioning them to work as a team and work as a unit. You are conditioning them into this discipline and this. There are certain things that are required of you, and then you take them out once that initial training is done, and now you are serving in the armed forces in whatever capacity you are in. And then once that time is over, then you have to divest yourself of that military persona again, no matter what your experiences are, whether you served in war or peacetime. And now you have to transition back into your civilian life, and it's not going to be the same.
It's not easy.
And it is not easy, especially for our combat veterans. And,
Right.
Something that I touched on before, there are certain experiences in combat which transcends time and theater. But it makes it dually difficult to then transition back into the civilian populace because of the weight of those experiences, which now you will bear, admittedly, for the rest
They're
of
part
your
of
life.
your new persona, because you're a different person.
Yeah. I mean, it literally ingrains itself into your DNA.
Yeah.
But it's important that you do, because you are part of a machine, of your platoon, your everything. You have to work as one, so that that is part of your DNA. So then when you're done, how do you let go of that and go back? And I told you this, that when I watched American Sniper, that hit me so hard, because I watched Chris Kyle, 4 tours and so on, and he was at home. He knew exactly what he was to do, and he was an ace at it. But then when his wife finally said, "Oh honey, you're finally you again," he'd lost down all of his, senses, if you will, he got killed. It was like, because he was back in a world that he no longer fit in, and he fit in the military world because it fit him, and without people like him doing those kind of battles over there, we wouldn't be experiencing the freedoms we have.
You fit in out of necessity.
Exactly,
There
that's the
is
whole point.
a situational awareness. There is, you are mission oriented, you are survival oriented, and you're not there for the big picture.
Yeah.
Like Rene said, you're for the guy on your left and the guy on your right, and the bond you form between those individuals
But your life
is
depends
profound.
on your life depends on the right and the left, because again, you have to move, and everything has to happen together.
And it makes it even that much harder when all of a sudden that guy on your left or your right is no longer there, and and that hits.
And you
That
see what's
hits.
happened to them.
And you see what happened to that guy, and it hits, and you carry that, and
I guess the thing that bottom line comes out again is that when I watch some of these things, these documentaries on vets and stuff, is that what happened to our vets being heroes? I don't understand that. But the hero, I mean, the respect and the honor that should be given to any vet serving in any conflict, any war. They put their life on the line, and it isn't just the life they're putting on to get through that conflict. Their life is still on the line when it comes back, and they try to undo that to be a part of society
Well,
again.
we know we can't undo that, but it's how you learn to deal with it and how you manage it. But if you don't take that step, and it's really important for the people that we're airing this to, that are civilians that have never been in combat, to understand that, with PTSD, it is manageable, and as it is very difficult to reintegrate into civilian life, it is possible to do that.
And you guys are
We've done it. We've done it. So it's not, like we're just a bunch of military guys. No, we
live lives.
We live our lives. We're married. We have kids. We do what other people do. But the difference is that we carry that experience that we've gone through. That does not go away. And we don't look at ourselves as heroes. We look at ourselves as, hey, we had a commitment that we made. We took an oath to our government to do our job.
You don't even look at yourself.
That's exactly what we did.
That is what
all of
we
us
did.
But to me, it's
somebody
not.
comes up and says, "Oh, thank you, you're a hero." I'm like, "No,
we're
I did
not
the job."
heroes.
Yes, you
That's
did.
what I
Like
did.
for me, you're heroes.
No,
and,
no.
Well, no, really, that is my thing. I mean, I can have Tom Brady as a hero.
I
mean,
will tell
because
you,
we put our heroes on different things like
I will
that.
tell you that I consider myself a very fortunate individual simply by virtue of meeting and marrying my wife.
She'll love to hear that. She'll love to hear
And
that.
I say that because my wife happens to be a psychotherapist.
There you go.
So while we have made an agreement, you leave your therapist hat at work and then you come home. But I tell you, in as much as she does have the interest, I do share a little bit, but I cannot share with her a lot of the things that I share with my fellow vets at group.
It's very different.
And she'll ask certain things because in her capacity as a therapist, she'll say, "Hey, I've got this guy who's a Vietnam vet or whatever, and he's going through this," and I'll say, "Well, yeah, I understand that, whatever that happens to be," and so I might offer a little insight, but God, she keeps me on the straight and narrow.
That's good. But I also.
And I tell you, I say this with as much sincerity as I can muster. I am here today because of her. Because if I would not have met her, she is the hero. She saved my life.
Well, and but you guys have that for me. So
Come on over, Dave.
anyway, the part that she saved him, but the part that the VFW still plays, so that people do have a place to go to talk to people that understand, because you can go to someone, a therapist, and they're still you can talk and vent, but they are not getting it like you guys do when you keep the brotherhood.
And it's one thing that my wife has said to her combat vet clients. She goes, "Yeah, I'll listen to your stories. I was never in the military, and I was certainly not a combat veteran, but I will help you get through it from what I do."
And then it's just
with your experience,
and airing it.
Yeah.
So anyway, it looks like we're going to be wrapping this up, and I am so thankful. I can't tell you. I hope that this was good for you. Hopefully you got some message out to the people that are going to watch this. I love meeting with you guys all the time. Hopefully we'll get together.
An emotional thing.
Get together with your band again. I'd love to hear that. But again, thank you so much for your service as well. Okay?
Appreciate it. Always.
Okay. This has been the most enjoyable but emotional time with these guys. So until next time, Take care.
So I think as we discuss this in the next hour and a half, let us please remember the world does not end in Laguna Woods or California or the United States. Everything is interconnected. And this is why I'm here.
I spent my entire life trying to keep Russia in mind. I've been in the Navy and I've worked in Navy programs ever since. And when I retired, we had glasnost, we had perestroika, we had the disintegration of the Soviet Empire, and we had a friendly government in Russia. And 25 years later, we're facing the Russia as an enemy and potential annihilation with a nuclear war. You know, what happened? Why did this happen? And what caused it to happen? As a naval officer, I attended a think-pack fleet meeting briefing on Russia in maybe 1998, 99. And I left the meeting convinced that we were going to go to war with Russia. And I left the Navy and joined the reserves, joined the ready reserves. We had our own ships. The Defense Department started a program for Russian language and history at the University of Southern California. I joined that. I took Russian history, Russian culture, Russian language, and I spoke Russian for the Navy. And they sent me over, by the way, to Ukraine to buy a ship. They wanted me to look at a ship that was in Kherson, which is a town not far from Odessa. And found the people there to be fairly friendly. I found that I was looking at places that I could have been shot a year earlier if I had visited. And at this language school, I talked to what they called informants. They were Russians who spoke English and would come and hold conversations with you to try to improve your grammar and your pronunciation. There was 6 of them, and they all had the same paranoia. They said, you know, we've been invaded twice by the Muslims, by the Tartars, by the French, by the Germans, and you know, they count 7 times where they've been invaded and occupied the Tartars for a long time, centuries. And these people were all paranoid about not getting invaded again. And a lot of people didn't understand that. The history of Russian was very poor in our high schools. The only thing we knew about them was that it's a big country. Moscow was their capital. They had funny named towns like Minsk and this and that. And a lot of times they went down to Odessa because it was warm on the Black Sea. But the teachers didn't speak of much else about the Russians. So we came out of high school knowing very, very little about them. And I think this carries over to our relationships with Russia. They're very paranoid about their borders, and they always wanted a buffer zone around their country to buffer them from any hostile enemies. And we were never very sympathetic to that. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. had a chance to help them in some way. We're going from a communist system to a free market system, and the people there didn't know the value of anything. They just, you know, were so dependent on the government doing everything for them that they had never developed a concept of value. And we had an opportunity to ease a transition to a free market or cut them off cold turkey. And so we decided to cut them off cold turkey, and the population floundered for years trying to get some footing from the chaos. And we had a friendly president. His name was Yeltsin, and he was cooperating with the U.S. We had a lot of cooperation in space and nuclear fuels and rockets and missiles, and we generally were in a position to really become friends. And that cold turkey process kind of was a disaster. And we convinced Yeltsin that NATO was, slowly dying because the Russians were friendly with us, that NATO was going to be around and it was going to be a purely defensive system. So they didn't have to worry about that. And then a few years later, NATO attacked a Slavic country in Europe, and that caused Yeltsin to back off. It caused him to bring Putin in, and we've been dealing with Putin ever since. And the worst thing that happened was this invasion of Ukraine. We shouldn't have had another war like this.
Let me just, if I may correct you for 1 second, NATO didn't attack a Slavic country. NATO intervened to prevent a genocide in Kosovo.
I understood all that. I was just saying.
I know. They cook it so that it looks as if we had attacked a Slavic country. We hadn't attacked them. We prevented the Holocaust. Really a nasty one. I mean, if you had looked, and this is a number of. Sorry, I don't want to hold the conversation here. There's a number of things that have to be said also. And then one hears, we shouldn't deal with Ukraine, it's all corrupt. Now, first of all, this current government is not corrupt. And then all of us who've been in Vietnam will remember that whenever a war becomes uncomfortable, be it Vietnam, be it Afghanistan, they're so corrupt, Not that this is not a country where one of the most important states has former governors in the slumber. I mean, no. I'm talking about Illinois. Just to give you an example, I mean, I fully agree with you, and one has to know the history. We have to deal and consider with the mindset of a system that is not just a communist system. It's a totalitarian system that we're facing, and I think here in America, most people in Germany too, until Sunday, in America, most people, or many people, who cares, the Russians are far away. Well, they're not far away. Boom! They have now, they can lob their nukes over here in seconds, and they will if we don't, if we are not very careful.